So our second presentation this morning for this session is from Micky Grover-White. Micky Grover-White is the Lear Technical Director and sits on BSI's MHE/4 LIS, Hoist and Escalator Committee, where he's active in current work projects including revision of BS 5655 parts 11 and 12. He represents BSI on the SEN TC10 working group and is responsible for main lift safety standards of lift operation, and in the event of a fire and for accessibility. Over to you.
Thanks, Len. We ditch over that page, you've done that one. I can remember when Nick asked me to do this paper, and that was one Thursday night. I was at the swimming pool with my kids, and he rang me up and he went, "We've had a discussion at the management meeting and we think that you should do a paper." So, thanks, Nick. It was a struggle to try and work out what to do it on, but I thought that modernisation of model lifts is a topic that people might relate to quite well. So as a lift goes through its cycle, the state of the art obviously changes. There'll be items raised or require attention after a loader examination or a thorough examination. Items of equipment will obviously wear and require repair or replacement, but ultimately at the end, the general condition of the lift means that the lift will need to have a modernisation or an upgrade. Now, since the introduction of the lift regulations, there's been many manufacturers who have designed lifts typically known as model lifts. And these would be lifts that are subject to a type examination, and they would be approved by a notified or a UK approved body. They're typically serially produced. They have defined, designed parameters, and many of the technical solutions are outside or do not meet the designated or harmonised standards. Now, examples of these could be where they don't have a machine room when they were installed to EN 81.1 or EN 81.2. They may have suspension methods such as flat belts or ropes using aramid, or could be coated in a polymer sheath. They may have steel wire ropes with a reduced diameter, or even have reduced diameter traction sheaves. There may be limitations on the car or counterweight mass and have specific traction calculations, or they may even have maintenance methods that are accessed via the lift car rather than through the landing door. Now, modernising model lifts can be far more complex than what people may envisage, and it may be challenging to obtain the necessary documents, the technical file or the type examination certificate, and in these cases, changing elements solely relies on the full compliance to the applicable standard at the time, as the modernisation process will unlikely satisfy the type examination certificate that's been approved. And one of the important things on modernisation, especially for the model lifts, where the type examination certificate or the technical file is not available, the modernisation scheme has got to keep within the type examination certificate. Therefore, the responsible company becomes responsible for that, for those changes and any of those risks that are being completed. So how do we then get over this? Well, first of all, EN 8180 can be used, and that recommends that an audit is conducted using Annex A to assess the existing level of safety of that lift. And then it can determine what changes, if any, are necessary to bring it up to today's state of the art. And that would drive communication between the lift company and the building owner on what are the changes that may need to be done. But it does not foresee the solutions that deviate from those harmonised or designated standards, which may be part of that type examination lift. Now, one of the other things that we need to look at, and probably one of the subjects that Nick loves to talk about, is building owners' responsibilities to the Building Safety Act, or possibly the Fire Safety England regulations, especially where lifts are used by firefighters or for an evacuation lift. Now, there's different bits on my paper that I've tried to talk about, but I think one of the areas that a lot of people might have relation to is the reline of a lift car. So I was going to focus more on that side of things, really. So, as I say, many of the model lifts have fixed design parameters, and there may be restrictions on the equipment that can be used or may need to be upgraded, including safety gears, buffers, or even machines to meet that safety that type examination certificate. And this is where we're changing the mass of the car of greater or decreasing the car weight of up to about 5%. Now, there's a couple of examples that have come through from some of the LEA members. Not only are we looking at the components of a lift, but also the design of the lifts. Now, so we've got three small examples here. Now, on this first example, what we had was a company had relined the lift car, but what had happened is that they'd put additional weight in the front of the lift. And because the suspension means is at the rear of the car or behind the guide rail system, what it actually done, the lift was still within the same tolerance, but it had tipped the car frontwards, and therefore it started clipping all the locks and started taking out the skate and ripping all those off. The second example, where we've got a cross-corner suspension method, again, additional weight had been placed at the front of the car. I think it was a new COP in this case. And what had happened then is that the rear of the roller and the front roller had then started wearing away a lot quicker and blowing the rollers and the rubber parts. And then lastly, it was a hydraulic lift. Again, extra weight had been placed into the car, and as the lift got to the top floor, the guide rail started coming away out the wall because there was too much wall and the forces weren't met. Now, some of the other examples, the counterweight. The counterweight may exceed its limit. Not only that, the amount of model lifts now that have the counterweight fall to the brim of weight, but then also the sustainability of taking those weight out and adding in heavier weights such as lead may push that counterweight out of how much you can put in, but plus exceed its limits. The machine, I mentioned this before, the machine, the sheave shaft load might be exceeded. Can that take the additional weight of the car plus the counterweight? The brake, again, that may be exceeded. Will the lift stop in an emergency? Suspension system, if I go back to one of the examples there, it was using a flat belt system, and that had exceeded the safety parameters or the safety factors of that belt, and they had to upgrade that belt to a thicker or a greater belt system. The traction of the lift may be exceeded, especially if we take out weight. So we're not always just looking at increasing the mass, but if we look at the decrease, the lift and the traction may let the lift run away. Again, as the example, the guardrails and the brackets, the buckling factor or the forces that are put onto the walls, or possibly even into the pit, when we're looking at a safety gear activation or a carb or counterweight buffer. And then, as I say, the rating of the safety components, the rating load of the safety gears and the buffers may be exceeded. Now, once the modernisation scheme has been completed, we can use BS 5655 Part 11 or BS 5655 Part 12, and we can do the test that's recommended within those documents. Now, the test records don't just have to be 5655 Part 11 or 12, it could be an older lift, 5655 Part 10, or even the PAS 32. And we can use any combination of sections within those documents, but what we can't do is use PAS 32 for a couple of sections and 5655 for another part of the section. Now, if we look at 5655 Parts 11 and 12, they're almost 20 years old now. So thankfully, good old BSI is looking to update them. There's a huge amount of work that's going into these at the moment. Fingers crossed, we can keep the working group going, and we'll have something around, hopefully around about this time next year, that we might be able to talk about a little bit more on. So there's some recommendations within 5655 on how to do a modernisation. And it first of all starts off with a risk assessment. And that proposes any of the modifications, again, discussions with the building owner. But one of the important things is that to ensure that the safety level has not been reduced. And then we complete a file, and it needs to be compiled by the modernisation company. Prior to placing the lift back into service, the replacement components and all other related components are then tested. Records of those tests should also then be retained by the maintenance or the modernisation company. The original CE marking should be retained within the lift, and even if we strip out a full modernisation, so we're going back to the guides and keeping the original fixings, even that CE mark should be retained within that modernised lift. A permanent notice should then be fixed on or in the car, stating the date of the change, and also that modernisation company that's conducted the works. Updated information should then be provided to the owner, whether change affects the user or the maintenance procedures. And then finally, a record of change provided on the logbook. So good news for me. I'm just about coming to the end of this one, so I'm quite a quick talk on this one. Sweating like mad as well. But obviously, once we've completed the modernisation, we look at the lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations, or LOLA, and that explains that a thorough examination is also required following any exceptional circumstance. And this could be damage or failure, being out of use for a long period of time, but obviously relating to this topic, where major changes are likely to affect the equipment's integrity, for example, a modification or replacement and repair of critical parts. Now, this guidance surrounding thorough examinations is part of the building owner's responsibility, and that the building owner has to ensure that it's conducted by an independent inspection body, and then is completed prior to placing the lift back into service. And Len, that's me. I'm done. So I told you I'd be in and out.
Obviously a topic of great interest, because there's lots of model lifts out there, particularly machine room-less lifts. So do we have any questions from the floor? Yep.
Yeah, hi, John Reynolds, Mitsubishi Electric.
Hi.
Thanks for that. It's quite interesting you talk about model lifts and the times that I've been asked to look at them in terms of modernising. And basically, most companies, I think, would run a mile and want to replace rather than modernise, for the various reasons and the risks involved. And I just wonder if there's a sustainability issue here. Some of these lifts that we've seen have been less than 7 years old, maybe some a lot less than that. And maybe there's something that we need to introduce to prevent the situation arising in the future, where we're throwing lifts into buildings that have got to be ripped out and are useless basically within 10 years.
Yeah, so there's sort of two parts on that. First of all, the standards for new lifts. We need to is obviously looking at sustainability. That's one of the big topics, but also modernisation side of things. So again, the revision of 5655 is also looking at sustainability and carbon neutral. So yeah, we need to look at. We can't just look at modernisation. We can't just look at new lifts. We need to look at it as a whole package. But both of those are being looked at in sort of both the areas.
Thank you. With regards to Lear, what do you think about the situation where technical dossiers are lost by the client, never mislaid, never handed over? Well, Lear actually members have been obliged to provide technical dossiers for lifts they produced.
It's that's a difficult question, because Lear doesn't hold the technical documentation.
The members will be obliged to provide it.
It's a question that's been asked many, many times, and it's the agreement between manufacturers, but also the notified body of the type examination certificate. And it's that area that we face the barrier. I'm not sure how we can answer that, if I'm honest, but we can keep looking and see if there's a way on handing those, being able to get hold of those technical files. But I think you will find that it's tied to the type examination certificate, and manufacturers, notified bodies are reluctant to release those.
Well, that information should be the lift when it's installed and tested, so the information must exist.
That side of it should be available, and the building owners should be able to go.
They often lose them. How many times do you go to site and find the manuals on a dusty corner?
Building owners can go back to the manufacturers and ask them for that information. They can request it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? One of the questions I would ask on that is about packages. Lots of manufacturers obviously have looked at packages for their own products, and those would presumably be compatible with the original design and would take account of the safety factors involved. What evidence is there that that's actually happening?
Just repeat that again.
If manufacturers have packages for modernising their own equipment.
But if a manufacturer is modernising their own lift, then they'll have access to the technical file and the type examination certificate, so they are more easier to get hold of the information and to be able to modernise. Where they've got an upgrade package, yes, that will be a fairly simple,
straightforward,
fairly simple, straightforward. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Is there no further questions?
Can I ask again?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Len. Thank you.